Hello everybody, how's it going? I hope your 2025 is going well. I'm here basically to give some of my quick thoughts on the UK year-end list for this year. Firstly, I'll apologise for none of the review videos you may have expected to have come out yet. I've just been very, very busy with a lot of other things. But they released the UK year-end list pretty early this year, and I've got a few thoughts on it that I thought I'd just note down. This video probably won't be as fast as the previous two that I've done for the previous two year-end lists, and the big reason why is that I didn't really do predictions for the UK year-end list. I did for quite a bit of the year, and then I just stopped. I got rid of my Twitter predictions page back in like February, because honestly just having a Twitter just didn't really do my mental health too well, and I was going to continue it on the side, but I've been part of the BuzzJack community where they talk and reveal information about the year-to-date lists. But they've been revealing more and more information, like to the point where they reveal the year-to-date top 40 for every week, which I'm fine with. I like that a lot. But the more they've done it, the less I felt a need to really work on predicting the UK year-end list for myself. Plus, on top of that, there are a few people in that community and who do also watch some of my content who have also put in a lot of time to do their own predictions of the year-to-date list, and just more and more I haven't felt personally as much of a need to do it. But these are just some of my quick thoughts on the list. I've got the list up here for yourself. Here's the top 10 right in front of you over there. And now, just comparing this, in my opinion, to last year's list. So if we go to last year's list, I would consider like 1, 2, 3, 4. I would say like 7 of the 10 songs were like a 7 or 8 out of 10, higher than that. There was some really great stuff that was very, very big in the UK last year. But if you go to 2024, I would only say that like at most there's 3 songs in the top 10, in my opinion, that are like better than the 8 out of 10. Good Luck Babe, Birds of a Feather, and maybe Too Sweet. I mean, there's some good things you could say about our year-end top 10. One of the most notable is the fact that it's quite a fresh top 10 if you just look individually at the songs that made it, just in the sense that they're all pretty new songs. Everything in the year-end top 10 peaked in 2024. Of course, Stick Season was on the list last year, but it hit number 1 at the start of the year. Also, Austin and Lose Control, they were released in 2023, but they really took off in 2024. So it's quite a fresh year-end top 10 in that regard. But just in my opinion, I think one of the biggest differences and one of the biggest fall-offs is, in my eyes, a lot of the music that hit it big this year, and this could have something to do with the resurgence of pop, is that so much of it is trend chasing in a way that doesn't really hit all that well for me. Like, compared to last year, I mean, we got a song like Escapism at number 3 on the year-end list, which is a completely experimental, completely off-the-wall song that somehow managed to become a massive hit, one of the biggest of the decade. Above it, you got Sprinter, which is a modernization of current UK hip-hop trends, but done in a very unique way, and it's become the biggest UK rap hit ever, almost the biggest hit of its year. And on top of that, you got other weird stuff like a trance hit with Miracle, and, you know, the Pink Panther song, Boys the Liar, 2 Afrobeat songs, and you've also got Kill Bill and its very strange and off-putting and out there song concept. But when it comes to 2024, like, I'll be fair, I don't like Please Please Please, but it is a unique song. It's a unique hit. It's one of the stranger number 1 hits we've had this decade, a part yacht rock, part synth pop, part like Disneyfied track, lots of very jokey and kind of weird lyrics. And of course, Please 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 has that huge bizarre key change in the second verse from C major to A major. That's very, very bizarre in a hit song this year. And I guess you could say Beautiful Things is also a bit of an odd hit in some regard, with that big tempo change and just the general sound of the thing. Other than that, though, I felt like a lot of the big hits this year were trying really hard to just make it big off modern trends. You know, you got the songs like Espresso and Lose Control and Too Sweet, and especially a bar song, Tipsy, which all to me sound like songs that are just making it big off trends that have been big over the past few years and not doing them in a particularly interesting way. I mean, Too Sweet and Good Luck Babe have really interesting lyrical concepts that are definitely not what you'd expect in a big hit, but sonically they're pretty boring, pretty dull. And songs like, Espresso, Lose Control, Stick Season, they could have been big at any time in the past 15 years. I wouldn't say it's like a bad year-end top 10. I just find it very mediocre and quite disappointing, really, especially compared to last year. I also find it funny as well, like Cruel Summer, in my eyes, is better than anything that's in the top 10, but it is funny that it's stuck at number 11, and I'm quite glad that it's stuck at number 11 simply because it wasn't really a fresh hit. It's a song from 2019 that did about as well as it did last year, and I'm quite happy that this year in top 10, as I mentioned before, has songs that peaked in 2024. I actually caught something on the radio because it plays in my house about the complete lack of success that British artists had, not just globally but in the UK. And it really is telling because the biggest British hit of the year was Stargazing by Miles Smith, and it's only number 12. What I think is really quite interesting though is the fact that Texas Hold'em by Beyonce was as big of a hit in the UK as it was. If at like the start of the decade you would have told someone, okay, Beyonce is going to have a country flavored album and a dance flavored album with a big hit of both of them, and you were to ask them which one do you thought would be the bigger one in the UK, you would have said the dance one. But Texas Hold'em was a considerably bigger hit. It would have rated in around about 900k in the year. And I think as well, if I look back and if others look back at the end of the decade, we're going to look back on this time as the time that country music had a massive boom. Beyonce is definitely going to come up not as the one who like started the trend, but the one who definitely had a big hand in pushing it over. So who cares about how many CMA Country Music Awards like she's going to get recognized or not? She doesn't really need that shit. She made country music a lot more popular on a global stage, especially over here. And of course, one of the big stories of 2024 happened right at the start of the year with the resurgence of Murder on the Dance Floor by Sophie Ellis-Bextor. It's not a new entry here. The official charts year-end database on their website goes back to about 2006. It made the year-end list in both 2001 and 2002. It was very close to getting that number one spot again, but it didn't because Stick Season was just too big at the time. And I think, in my opinion, you could argue it was definitely a bigger hit this year than it was back then, simply because even if you combine the chart sales it got in 2001 and 2002, it didn't do nearly as well comparatively than it did this year. Moving on down to 21, and this is a slightly depressing thing about this list. So 2024's year-end list was by far one of the most difficult for a song to get on. It had one of the highest barriers of entry of any year-end list ever in the UK. And similar to last year and a lot of years in the 2020s, towards the end, the chart sales just started to like fall off around the top of the charts. So Taste, which was released on the 23rd of August, is the newest song on the year-end list this year, which makes 2024, in that sense, the second stalest year-end list of all time after 2020, where Ain't It Different was the newest song to make it, and it was released on the 20th of August. So only 3 days separating in that sense. I have so many thoughts about how this song ended up becoming a number one hit for like 9 weeks over here. But one of the good things about 2024, Mr. Brightside did not enter the year in top 20 like I thought it would. I mean, its chart sales increased massively this year, but as mentioned, it was a big year for chart sales. In fact, I think the top 12 all shifted 1 million. Stargazing shifted 1 million, and everything above it also shifted 1 million as well. In fact, Stick Season shifted 1.8 in the year. So that thankfully kept Mr. Brightside in the same spot that it was. The first time since streaming was added to the charts where it didn't increase in position, although it did increase with a lot of chart sales. Unwritten was another massive resurgence that happened. If you just come from me through Mark and Todd and all the American reviewers, like if you're interested in the charts over there and you've come over here, like you wouldn't know that because it wasn't quite big enough in the States to actually chart again. But Unwritten was on year-end charts all over the world. I think it may have even had a bigger resurgence than Murder on the Dance Floor in most places. It never actually made the year-end list in the UK. It was released in 2004 and didn't quite make enough chart sales to make that list. And just speaking for myself, I never actually heard this song much on the radio. In fact, I never heard this song in full until this year. But that could just be me. So this really feels like a 2024 hit, in my opinion. So a fun fact I may bring up in the worst list. Houdini is the only song released in 2024 to have shifted more than 100,000 chart units in a week, which by that parameter makes it the biggest event single of the fucking year. So bigger than anything from Taylor Swift, anything from Sabrina Carpenter, anything from the Drake-Kendrick Lamar beef. In the UK, more people were clued in to Eminem making lame trans jokes and saying fuck his kids than any other single release this year, which is just phenomenal. Also is only number one to spend more than 1 week at number one in the UK, and by far his worst number one since the song about the monster under the bed, which is probably one of his most underhated singles in my opinion. As you can see as well by the success of artists like Michael Markaghi and Mark Amber, it really was a big year for commercial core folk shit in the UK. I didn't think this was a bad year for mainstream music in the UK, but as mentioned before, a lot of the trends just did not hit for me in the same way that a lot of the trends from the previous year did. And this is pretty fun. Christmas music did not nearly do as well this year as it did last year. As you can see, Last Christmas is 12 places lower than it was in 2023. And in fact, there's only 3 Christmas songs on the year-end list as well, which is lower than last year. So I'm just going to zoom in actually. You've got to give it to The Door by Teddy Swims for being the sleepiest sleeper hit of the year, probably the sleepiest sleeper hit of the decade, because it first charted in April. You got to bear in mind that there's about a week off for the dates they give. So it first charted in April and then it peaked at the end of November. So it took 7 months for it from it when it first charted to hitting the top 5. Hot to Go is also one of the biggest sleeper hits of the year as well. It charted about a month later and peaked around about the same time. Alibi by Ella Henderson and Rudimental is number 35. I think it deserved to be a little bit higher, not because the song is good, but because it's pretty emblematic of why, in my opinion, 2024 was such a disappointing year for the mainstream charting electronic music. It didn't make any sense to me because 2023 was a fantastic year, probably one of the best years, and 2024 was a complete dud, one of the worst years. It's not actually the highest dance song. We had the Prada song and Murder on the Dance Floor, if you want to count that above it, but these are the 2 biggest 2024 dance releases. Kisses is fine. It's one of the songs from Ireland's house music scene that ended up crossing over. We've had a lot of songs like those in the 2020s, and I don't love it, but it is one of the better ones. It's not awful like the Birds in the Sky song that's lower down on the list, but Alibi is more representative in my eyes as to why electronic music, the mainstream shit, was so shit. Like, it's another song that is carried off a very recognizable sample, that being Gangsta's Paradise, and them using that to write a very different set of lyrics on the top whilst just running off that nostalgia. It's a big legacy act like Rudimental, who have, for the past 10 or so years, let's be honest here, they've completely lost a lot of their respect. They're just they're just like a trend chasing record label, and it's yet another complete dud from Ella Henderson, who's at this point her greatest hits album is going to be full of other people's songs on it, and it's not even close to the worst. Like, this is not worst list worthy even. At least the beat is kind of decent, and the Kygo one that's lower down the list, that one is way worse of a sampled song in my eyes. But yeah, I think it does sum up pretty well why a lot of the mainstream dance music this year was so disappointing. Also why drum and bass has been getting quite tired and quite overexposed as a trend. So it probably deserved to be a little higher than Kisses just for that alone, not because the song is good. An interesting thing to consider for the country music boom in the UK over the past couple of years is how, some of the big acts who have finally crossed over are able to stick around a lot longer on the charts than their chart runs would make you believe. So I Remember Everything had a fine enough run. It was pretty likely the song was going to make the year-end list, but as you can see, its run initially finished around May time, and then despite being on ACR, it re-entered almost every single month, at least once afterwards, because Zach Bryan and a lot of the country artists who crossed over just have like this big baseline level of streams that they're just always going to get. On top of which, I believe a lot of the people streaming the music pay for their streaming services. There's a higher ratio of those that do than don't. That's just the theory I have. It's just a hypothesis, but that stuff is counted much heavier for the charts than you'd otherwise expect. It's not even the only Zach Bryan song on this year-end list, as you'll find out later. But the point I'm making is that the fact this was the 39th biggest hit of the year would have seemed extremely odd to me at the start of the year. But because Zach Bryan has that big following in the UK now, he can now afford to have this perform really well, even when it's not doing well enough to chart, if that makes sense. Like, it could potentially even make next year's year-end list, who knows. Dua Lipa's year in the UK this year was not nearly as commercially successful as 2020, as you'd all know. She does have a couple songs on this list, but they all missed the top 40. When in 2020, she had 3 songs from Future Nostalgia in our year-end top 40. So it's quite the fall off in that sense, which is a shame because in my opinion the album was better, but I know I'm the only one who really holds that opinion. I'm a little sad Not Like Us is only 43. Obviously the song wasn't going to be as big as it was in the US, but 43, that's such a shame. I mean, I guess it's any consolation, Drake hasn't had a song as a main artist make a UK year-end list since the Tootsie Slide, which was a long time ago. But just to think that, like, from a chart numbers perspective, this pulled in less chart sales than Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls. As you can see as well, as you may have noticed, this has been another big year for the legacy old hits. Unless the charts company actually do anything about it, this is just going to continue. Iris set a new peak this year. Everywhere set a new peak this year. Riptide by Vance Joy set a new peak this year. All of those songs will definitely be on next year's year-end list unless the charts company kind of do something about this or set in a new rule, which at this point I'm quite ready for them to do. Obviously I'm open to exceptions, and you got to remember that the charts company as well, it's a company and they are supplying data to a lot of labels and record labels, but I just don't really see what this kind of data is really useful for. Or maybe, just do what I suggested last year and have this list and then have like a separate one as well for the hit songs that were, at least hit the top 40 this year or something along the lines of that. Just like 2 separate year-end lists where the nerds like us and people who would also be interested from like a label point of view at seeing the big new hits hit it big, to see what was actually a big hit and not just something that's been carried by your grandma streaming it week after week. Yes and was a very interesting one because when people on the BuzzRap forum were really surprised, and me as well, that this song finished at 45, because in the UK it was a big hit. Not only was it released at the start of the year, but it was like top 10 for 9 weeks. And then just by the end of the year, even with the Wicked soundtrack giving Ariana Grande like an artist boost, I don't know how many places, it must have fell about like 15 places in like the past month and a half, 2 months, I can't remember exactly, but by the end of the year it must have only been doing about 2,000 or so chart sales just based off what we were all seeing, and yes, it finishes considerably lower than anyone would have expected at the start of the year. Like when I saw the first quarter year-end chart come out, there's no way I would have thought this was going to miss the year-end top 40, and yet it's 45. Asking making it this year is quite nice. Like, it was essentially kind of robbed from 2023's list. Then again, I may just be thinking that because I fucking love the song and I was playing it so many times at 2023. So I look at this chart run for 2023 and I'm like, okay, maybe it wasn't really that big. It probably just felt bigger to me because I was streaming it like again and again and again. But it was close to last year's list and it missed, and I did not think it would have a chance this year. But despite being on ACR, it stuck around ridiculously well. As you can see, it charted from January all the way to July, despite being on ACR. It's a bit clearer to see how successful it was when you look at the dance charts where there's no ACR rule. The year started about, where was it? Yeah, it was about there. And as you can see, it did not fall out of the dance top 20 at all in the UK this year. It's still going really, really strong. It's still pulling in more than like about 6,000 to 7,000 chart units a week. Which is quite interesting because I feel like normally the songs that do that well after they peak in the UK, they're generally the ones that chart. Maybe this is, I could be completely wrong on this, but I always feel like they're the ones that have big international appeal to some level. This song's chart impact outside the UK and Ireland was very small, but it was clearly able to stick around and do incredibly well. And personally, I'm very happy for that. It's a great, really, really good dance song. It's probably better than like all the other dance songs on this list, really. Another thing about 2024 is that ACR distortion compared to what was actually big is probably at its greatest. So if you were to just have looked at the charts this year, you may see something like Happier by Blessed Madonna and Clementine Douglas at 51 and be like, that's quite a bit lower than I would have thought, because we had a few songs, and this has been the case for the past few years, but it was very noticeable in 2024. Songs that just avoid ACR because they're just lucky. They just consistently dance around it. And as you can see here, this song first hit the top 40 in March. Once again, the chart week is out by a week. So it first hit the charts in March, and then it fell out the charts in like September. So it was in the top 40 for 24 weeks, like half the year, and it's only 51. That feels like a little bit off. It didn't peak very high, but as you can see, it somehow managed to avoid ACR by sticking between 20 and 30 for most of the year. Here we finally got to the part where we're getting songs that were on the year-end top 10 last year. And this is actually great because I think I mentioned before, but I like to use the previous year-end top 10's position on a year-end list to see how good the rate of turnover is for a year-end chart. And even if there was nothing on this list that was released after the 23rd of August, Flowers and also Anti-Hero as well, which were in the top 5 biggest hits of last year, missed the top 50. The other repeats were As It Was, Escapism, and I think that's it. Oh no, Sprinter as well. So only 5 songs from last year's year-end top 10 is on the year-end list, and that's pretty low in recent times. I don't think it's been that low at all this decade, which is pretty damn refreshing. Birds in the Sky, New Era, this was another egregious ACR dodger that may have looked much bigger than it actually was because of how it dodged ACR on the charts. I mean, it first hit the top 40 in, that's February, basically, that's the tracking week for February. And it fell out in August. Once again, that's 6 months of a song in the top 40. And I'm glad I don't listen to the chart show anymore. I fucking hate this song. It's so bad. Would have been a pain in the ass to catch a second of it on the radio in my eyes. Backbone by Chase and Status and Stormzy. To anyone who did not follow the UK charts at all this year, and this is their first exposure, this was our only number 1 this year that did not chart on Billboard or the global charts at all. It's a drum and bass song featuring Stormzy, who himself hasn't actually had a number 1 hit in about 5 years, and his relevance on the charts at least has been going down ever since it peaked in late 2019, early 2020. Honestly, it's more for Chase and Status really than anything. This is like the 3rd time they've made Badadan, and really it was last year where they had that big breakthrough, but the 2 songs on 2023's year-end list was still popular enough to make this year-end list, which means they've got 3 songs on the year-end list, which is just insane. Wildflower would be another one where if you just watch the charts show, you'd be surprised it's this high, but that's because of chart rules. I don't think it charted until August, but once again, this was just off chart rules. It was big before then, and it had that big second peak towards the end of the year. Must have been a TikTok thing. I wouldn't actually know, to be honest. But yeah, not quite as big as Lunch, which was higher. It was 57. But yeah, surprisingly big hit and a pretty decent one. Yellow by Coldplay had a ginormous boost this year. It must have been something to do with performances in the UK. You also notice Coldplay, they released an album this year, and none of the songs off the album were big enough to make the year-end list, which is fine by me. Feather by Sabrina Carpenter is definitely another one that's had its chart run obscured, partly by ACR, but also partly because Sabrina Carpenter had much bigger hits. Its chart run in the UK is pretty weak for this year. It peaked, yeah. So yeah, that was its chart run, which for a newish hit is pretty weak. But of course, you got to remember this was a huge year for Sabrina Carpenter, and she always had songs that were more popular than it, especially towards the end of the year. Only 2 weeks in the top 20 though, and it's number 69. I was surprised it was only 1 spot lower than As It Was. Here's a section of some fairly newish hits. Badadan, higher on this list than last year's list. That was kind of expected, really. Band for Band 2, not nearly as high as you would have assumed, considering how this was such a big hit in the US, and it's only 72 on this year-end list. Guess is the biggest song from the Brat Summer. That's completely understandable. Sprinter was way lower, and it did not do nearly as well as I assumed it would, considering it was so big last year, and yet it's down to 74. Actually, it would have been much lower. It may have even missed the list if Central C didn't release a song as big as Band for Band, because that's what gave it like a resurgence on the hip-hop charts that it desperately kind of needed. Yeah, it was already down to 18 on the hip-hop charts, and then Band for Band sort of gave it a bit of a bump up. Gracie Abrams was one of the big artists from the end of last year, and it may be a little bit surprising to only see one song of hers on this list. That's So True was very, very close. If they allowed this week's chart positions for this list, it would have made it, but unfortunately for that song, it didn't. Praise Jar in the Moonlight, I just love the novelty that a full-on reggae song with like an actual reggae drum beat was one of the biggest hits of the year. This song is not nearly as high as I would have expected. It peaked around the start of the year, and top 10 for 5 weeks around the start of the year. You'd expect something like that, and charted until May, you'd expect something like that to be a little bit higher than 79, but once it fell off the charts, it really fell off. It fell out of the indie charts by August and was doing very little by the end of the year. It annoys me specifically that Some Days was able to make the year-end list that it was released in. The worst Sonny Fodera song getting to that position when Asking didn't, and wouldn't be too surprising to see it on next year's year-end list as well. If you don't know much about mainstream dance music right now, I'd suggest giving Move a listen, because it's pretty likely, I wouldn't guarantee it, but it's pretty likely that songs that sound like this are going to be the big sound in house music going into 2025. Europeans' very smooth, dull take on South African Afro house. That's the sound that house music is probably going to embody the most in 2025. I can't know for sure, because I thought trance music was going to be huge in 2024 and it wasn't. But we have seen some of the big European house acts like Topic and Tiesto and some of the others move to making Afro house, because it is the current hot shit. It's the current trend, and Adam Port's song Move is definitely a big reason as to why this is a pretty big global hit. Glad to see Escapism held out long enough to be on this year-end list. It's still doing pretty well on the indie charts. It's doing about 7 to 8k a week, and Ray currently has another song from My 21st Century Blues that is doing really well on the charts right now. So I actually don't think it's too tall of an order to say that this could have a decent chance of making 2025's year-end list as well. That could be a stretch, but it'll definitely do at least 200k chart sales in 2025, possibly even more. And what I love about Evergreen being here, even if I don't like this song at all, is that this is one of the best ACR dodges of all time since they added the chart rules, because it first charted in March 2023 and then had a bit of resurgence towards the end of 2023, and then this was its chart run. The entire thing was on SCR, hitting the top 40 around about March, April time, and just staying between the 40 and 60 range pretty much until September. That's, how many weeks is that? 49 weeks, all of which on SCR. If that's not the record, that's very close to it. If you only listen to the top 40 from the top 40 show, you're probably very confused as to why it's here. That's why, because it was consistently doing around about 7 to 8k chart sales throughout the year. Back on 74 was a little bit of a surprise for me, though, because this one's chart run was not nearly as pronounced, like, that's it. But if you go to the independent charts, you can see that it looked a lot healthier for a lot of the year. Only fell out of the independent charts in December. Just as a reminder, Praise Jar and the Moonlight fell out all the way back in July, August time. Still, probably one of the biggest surprises, in my opinion, of songs that managed to do consistently well in 2024. Going into the final 10 now, and here is one of my favourite appearances on the list. It's Something in the Orange by Zach Bryan. As I mentioned before, Zach Bryan has just built that fan base, and this song now consistently does about 9 to 10k chart sales a year. It did actually chart in the UK. Its entire run was on ACR though. it charted twice. That was its chart run in 2024, but it was on ACR the entire time. And there doesn't even seem to be a reason as to why. I think it's just because Zach Bryan was so hot at the time and has cultivated that fan base so well that they're able to stream a song that came out in 2022, peaked in the US in 2022 and 2023 so well that even though it never touched the top 40, it's looking like it's going to become a bit of a legacy hit going into the 2020s. If it's on next year's year-end list, don't be surprised. Here we have, I think, there's only 2 songs, I believe, which never charted that made the year-end list this year. Naive by the Kooks is one of them, a big hit in 2006 that consistently streams very well. It's got about 700 to 800 million streams on Spotify. I should mention as well, I was told that this RE thing, it's not actually a re-entry, but what it suggests is that, as well as the week count, is how many year-end top 200s it is. It's probably most clear on this image right here with these 4 songs. Naive by the Kooks has, as I mentioned, done very well on streaming in the UK, so it's not too surprising, at least to me as someone who's paid a lot of attention to the Spotify charts over the past 10 years, to see that it would have made the top 200 on a bunch of year ends in the past 9-10 years since they added streaming to the charts. The most interesting thing to me, though, is that there's an implication here that Something in the Orange by Zach Bryan was on last year's year-end top 200 list. It wouldn't have been on 2022's. But if this is the second year-end top 200 it's made, then that really is saying something. And also Sound of Silence by Disturbed it was definitely close to the 2016 one, and it hasn't really been close since until this year. This is another pretty interesting one, a egregious ACR dodger that is still dodging ACR on the charts as we talk, and it's because of the Cyril remix of the track, which Cyril is an Australian DJ who had 2 hits. I'll talk more about this in the worst list if I get around to it. But it caused this song to have a big resurgence, and then it just stuck around in a similar way to Evergreen, where it just dodged ACR for a ridiculously large amount of time. And the 2 versions were both popular this year, but I think the Cyril one, the dance remix, was the most popular one, and it enabled the song to stick around at the bottom of the year-end list for months on end. Should mention that Leave Me Alone by Fred Again is the first time Fred Again has actually appeared on a UK year-end list this year. Adore You really was snubbed. It's definitely the bigger song. I think this song was pretty lucky to make it though, like 1 or 2 more weeks and it would have fallen out. Linger by the Cranberries was a song that had a bit of TikTok virality this year, but re-entered a bunch of times. Not the first year-end list made. It made the one in 1994 somehow, but that was its chart run in 2024. Dial Drunk by Noah Khan. Now this is the second song on this list to not have charted at all in the UK in 2024, which is an interesting case, but that was definitely due to Noah Khan being so hot and having this album do so well at the start of 2024. It hit ACR very early in its run in August time of 2023, and being on ACR, it just wasn't big enough to be able to chart again. And because of that, and I think it actually peaked, they don't show the streaming charts here, but it definitely peaked in the streaming chart around the start of 2024. And yeah, kind of amazed that it managed to hang on and do so well. We couldn't really guess. I couldn't have guessed how many chart sales it was doing throughout most of the year after it fell off the streaming charts. It would have fell off around about April, May time, I think. But after that, I could not guess how many chart units it was pulling because, I mean, there's 2 versions of the song. But yeah, it managed to hold up and squeezed onto the UK year-end list at number 98. Definitely one of the strangest inclusions on this list. Dog Days Are Over really disappoints me because this one fell out the streaming charts very early, like March time, something like that. But it just consistently did very well just beneath the streaming charts. It's my least favourite inclusion. Not saying the song is bad, it's not, but I really don't feel like it really earned being the 99th biggest hit of the year. Over 360 by Charlie XCX, which surprised me. This was being genuine here. This was the one, as someone who got to have a lot of insight on the year-end lists for each week, this was definitely the most surprising one, simply because I thought this was going to miss. It didn't do quite well enough. It missed the top 10 and had a resurgence around the time the remix album came out, but not much of one, not enough to really sustain. And then it just suddenly appeared on the year-end list just 2 weeks before the the year actually ended. And the song it overtook, which is the most snubbed song on this list, is Kalani by Jordan Adetunji, which was on the year end list for about 3 weeks and then fell out on the last week of the year. Like, I feel bad for the guy. This was a pretty decent chart run, but it just got snubbed at the end. Other snubs towards the end of the year included X's by Tate McRae, which fell out on the last week of the year. But yeah, in general, this year-end list is kind of reflective of a lot of the thoughts I've had on UK year-end lists over the past few years. We're just seeing more legacy songs get big, whilst songs that were hits really need to be just bigger hits. And even if they were big hits at the start of the year, they're susceptible to fading off and doing considerably worse than you may have expected if we were talking about year-end lists previous years, like Praise Jar in the Moonlight being 79, and some other songs that I thought would have been on this list around even like the middle of the year, which just weren't doing enough by the end of the year to really sustain. Songs like Homesick by Noah Kahan and Sam Fender, Rich Baby Daddy by Drake, which I thought had a good chance of sneaking on at first, but fell out of the year-end list like September time. Even Popular by The Weeknd, which definitely the most snubbed song, very close to making it last year, and was on this year-end list until like December time, had a resurgence at the start of the year, a big resurgence, and just didn't do well enough to hit the year-end list. Some other songs that came close, which you may have expected, but just weren't quite big enough. Essentially, there were a few other songs that were certified gold, which didn't make the list that were released in 2024. As I mentioned, this was one of the highest cutoff rates of any year in this ever. The cutoff rate was around about 440k chart sales. But just getting up the Brit BPI certified information, as you can see, Home by Good Neighbours just about fell out. Chihiro by Billie Eilish and Apple by Charlie XCX. A lot of you probably expected Apple to make this list, but for the kind of year that 2024 had, like, I don't want to say it's released too late into the year. It was released in June, and the newest song on the list was released in August, but it just wasn't quite big enough in the UK, and it just wasn't able to get enough chart sales to really push over the top. In any other year, it would have had a good chance of making it, but just not this year. And yeah, that's the video. So hopefully I'll see you guys soon with a review video. But if not, I hope you take care of yourselves.